right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmera, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us here today for navigating policy shifts, supporting transgender veterans through advocacy and legal services. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording via email from Zoom within 24 hours. If you don't see that email, no worries. I'm going to drop my email here into the chat. You can reach out to me anytime. The training was approved by the Florida Bar for one CLE credit and one civil trial certification credit. I'm going to announce that CLE code towards the end of the webinar. I will also drop the code into the chat. If for whatever reason I forget to do one of those two things, I promise you it will also be included in the email that you will get from Zoom. And if we post on YouTube, I will also include this on the YouTube description as well. I will share all the materials that are being used today. I'm going to share those as well towards the end of the presentation. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility or the captions, you can reach out to me directly. The training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section, or PILS, of the Florida Bar. If you're not familiar with PILS, I'm going to drop a link to the section in the chat so you can learn more about PILS. And as far as questions and answers, if you have any questions, I'm going to encourage you to please use the Q&A feature. We will try to address those questions as they come in. Usually the question is answered. I can mark it as answered if it's answered during the presentation, but we'll save some time towards the end to make sure that we answer any pending questions that are outstanding. And that was my last piece of housekeeping announcement. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. I'm going to start with Rachel Brainaman. Rachel is the executive director of Mother Military Association of America, the largest organization supporting LGBTQ plus military communities. With over 20 years of nonprofit experience, she has led efforts to improve organizational operations and expand MMAA's programs and partnerships. Rachel is also the founder of Talem Consulting, a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice firm. She holds degrees from Austin College and Regis University and is a returned U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. Rachel is committed to fostering a more inclusive military environment for LGBTQ plus service members and their families. Simone Chris is our other speaker. Simone is the director of Transgender Rights Initiative at Southern Legal Counsel, where she uses impact litigation, policy advocacy, and training to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. She leads federal lawsuits challenging Florida's bans on gender affirming care and Don't Say Gay trans law. She also works for a medical legal partnership to support transgender youth and families. Simone is a national speaker, advocate, and award-winning attorney recognized for her work in public interest law. And our last speaker is Christy Bagalo. Christy Bagalo is delighted to be back at Florida Legal Services, serving as the director of the newly launched statewide Veterans Advocacy Project. Christy is a triple gator, having received her bachelor's, master's, and JD from the University of Florida. She has worked on the public interest field since her graduation in 2010, including Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida, the Ninth Circuit Public Defender, Florida Legal Services, and most recently the Veterans Consortium Pro Bono Program, where she is the director of the Discharge Upgrade Program, or was the director of the Discharge Upgrade Program. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rachel and the rest of our speakers. Thank you for being here with us today.
Hi, welcome everybody. I am excited to kick off the webinar and talk about everything through an advocacy lens. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about who we are as an organization. Modern Military, as Jorge said, is the largest organization of LGBTQ plus service members, military spouses, veterans, their families, and allies. We provide a united voice for the community and work to uphold and expand the civil rights progress made on behalf of the LGBTQ community. So our mission is to educate, advocate, and champion for the rights and well-being of LGBTQ plus service members, veterans, and their families, as well as people living with HIV. And we want to see an inclusive and equitable military environment where everyone in the community is respected, valued, and empowered to thrive. And we do that through our three different pillar areas: education, advocacy, and championing. You can see a little bit about the work that we're doing in each of these pillar areas. I won't go through each of these, but if you have clients or are seeking out help yourself, our direct services are listed under championing. A lot of our advocacy work is under that advocating, and educating is a lot of our work around our magazine, the different trainings and things that we do, and just the information that we share with the community. So why is this important right now in Florida? I wanted to give a little bit of an overview about how veterans and service members are impacted. Almost half of active duty troops and the majority of veterans live in states with the worst anti-LGBTQ laws. So you can see the ones that are in dark red are the worst active anti-trans laws. And in Florida in particular, there is 5.5% of active duty troops. That's just over 60,000 service members. There's just under 1.5 million veterans. And in 2025, there's been 7 anti-LGBTQ bills and 31 since 2023. So as we think about like how bills across the states have been expanding, that has been on the rise since about 2016, and they have just increased exponentially since about 2020, 2021. And now we're seeing even more of them at the federal level. So I'm not going to go too much into detail here, but I wanted to kind of give an overview of what has happened this year and how EOs and other types of things have been impacting the community as a whole. So this is just a few slides showing some of the things that have happened since January. There was the initial recessions of like the executive orders and actions from the Biden administration. Those were providing non-discrimination protections, health equity, and data collection, and all of those were rescinded. There was a memo for the heads of executive departments and agencies that would stop current and future funding from being provided to nonprofits that don't align with priorities. And that really could impact funding to organizations that serve trans people or research that is inclusive of trans and gender diverse folks. There was so many different EOs. There's the eradicating anti-Christian bias. That presupposes that supporting LGBTQ equality undermines religious freedom and ultimately would legitimize discrimination against the community. The other one I want to mention on this particular slide is about, in particular, ending radical indoctrination in K through 12 schools that prevents schools from recognizing trans students' identities, allowing schools to withhold mental health services, outing students to potentially unsupportive families, and restricting facility use and activity participation. And so, you know, what that means for military and veteran communities is that really does impact the DoD educational schools, as well as just public schools as a whole. And I want to highlight on this slide the prioritizing military excellence and readiness, which bars trans people from enlisting and serving openly and bans access to healthcare coverage for transition-related medical care. Also, the Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism is directed to all federal agencies and programs and could cause the loss of funding, again, for health centers that are inclusive of trans people. And then the Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI programs is another one that is being used to make it difficult to reach populations with unique health needs, and making sure that those services are culturally competent. And then on here, I wanted to also highlight the proposed rule aiming to change ACA coverage of gender affirming care. So previously, during one of the things with the NDA 2025 NDAA that was being discussed was the removal of gender affirming care for minors, and that would have made that policy change would essentially be out of step with the ACA. And that was one of the things that was brought up. And so now they are trying to change the ACA so that gender affirming care would not be covered or counted towards deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, or protected from lifetime limits. So that was a lot of information, but you know, what does this mean when you are working with veterans, and what is the type of information that you need to know as it relates to, for instance, VA care restrictions? So we know that the VA rescinded Directive 1341 that contains detailed guidance on the kinds of care that trans veterans can receive at VA facilities. So what you need to know is that it only applies to new care. If a veteran is currently receiving hormones at a VAMC or CITC, that care will continue. If a service member is receiving hormone care, it will continue. If they separate from active duty and begin VA care, all gender affirming care beyond hormones is no longer offered, and new hormone prescriptions will not be offered. So if a veteran needs to be hospitalized for any reason, they can ask for the accommodation of a private room. If the private room accommodation request is met with pushback, they should ask for the patient advocate to facilitate their request for an accommodation. And then every VA medical center should have a single stall restroom somewhere in the facility, and a veteran can ask about that or seek out those restrooms as an option to making accessing care at the VA more feasible for themselves. So if people, because we do know that there is like different places are complying in advance, even if policies are not in place. So if care, surgeries, or appointments are being terminated, any veteran who is being withdrawn from hormones prescribed by VA should immediately file a complaint with the patient advocate and contact their local VCC. And regardless of why, or you know, if they've just said that your care or your surgery or appointment is canceled, the veteran should definitely get a reason why in writing. It could just be a message in the patient portal, just anything in writing, email, whatever they can get. If the reason is not valid, then please send them to our website and have them fill out our discrimination reporting form, and we will work on connecting them with resources to make sure that that does not continue. Okay, so that's about the VA. Now I'm going to jump into talking a little bit about the trans ban. The executive order came out on January 27th that directed the Secretary of Defense to write new policy related to trans service members who've been serving openly since 2016. That policy has 5 different points. It discharges trans troops from service. It targets service members who have a current diagnosis or history of or exhibit symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria. It bans new trans and non-binary recruits from joining. It segregates single-sex spaces by sex assigned at birth, and it reverts military documents to sex assigned at birth and requires troops to be misgendered at work. Now, one of the things that during the lawsuits, and I'm going to bring up the lawsuits here in a second, but has been removed is the exhibiting symptoms consistent with. So that was something that was particularly concerning because that is very broad, and you know, anybody who doesn't fit into you know, standardized kind of gendered norms could be targeted under that. So that language has been removed from the policy. So the 2 cases that are happening right now that relate to the community are Talbot versus USA and Schilling versus Trump. So NCLR and Glad Law filed a lawsuit with Talbot versus USA on behalf of 32 active duty trans military personnel and prospective service members. Schilling is a little bit smaller. They have 7 active duty trans and 1 organizational plaintiff. Both of them have injunctions in place that came out at the end of March. So those injunctions prevent the DoD from initiating separation proceedings. Once those appeals are exhausted, plaintiffs can work on permanent injunctions. That obviously really varies depending on the length of time. Right now, the Navy, Air Force, and Army have paused processing voluntary and involuntary separations of trans service members. And we're waiting to see if there's going to be impacts to access to gender affirming care. So things are changing, you know, fairly quickly with the lawsuits, and that's what we know at the moment. So the other thing I wanted to kind of highlight is data erasure and how that really impacts the community, because it's not something that we normally think about. And in the 2025 executive orders, uh, there are a couple of them that have like data implications. So there is the ones that came out on January 20th, saying that the US officially recognizes only two sexes, male and female, and ends DEI programs and preferencing from all federal policies and practices. On January 29th, there was a memo sent to department heads asking them to comply with orders and remove any information that promotes gender ideology. I'm sure you all probably saw how much chaos that created. The removal of those public use data sets, web pages, and research was temporarily blocked by court order, so it is still accessible. But what that means is that there's different agencies that have stopped collecting data. So the CDC has announced it's stopped collecting data on trans identity. The EEOC has ended the use of the X gender marker and mix prefix during the intake process. It's also said that it will defend the biological and binary reality of sex and related rights to protect women from sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination in the workplace, which means that LGBTQ identity is no longer protected as under the EEOC discrimination laws. The US Department of State has stopped issuing passports with an X gender marker, and now the Social Security Administration is only recording the sex assigned at birth. So there are more lawsuits associated with this. Around passports, there's Orr v. Trump. The ACLU is suing to the administration. And as of March 25th, a preliminary injunction is pending. Currently, valid passports with an X marker are valid until they expire, but when they're renewed or replaced, it's going to reflect the sex assigned at birth. And then the State Department has halted applications for passports with X gender markers and changes to gender identity on existing passports. So for gender marker changes, if your gender marker changed before the policy change, your record at Social Security will remain unchanged. You can still legally change your name, but any updates to federal documents means that your gender marker would go back to being aligned with your assigned gender at birth. And then as far as healthcare access, gender identities are being scrubbed from VA patient records. So that the altering of medical records and other moves that are happening within VA facilities are ultimately making those facilities less welcoming to trans people. We know that there was already a lot of trust issues between the VA and the LGBTQ community, and this is just increasing the worries that the community has of continuing to receive care. There have been informal directives on immediately separating bathrooms by sex assigned at birth and no longer using pronouns that match gender identity. And then service members or veterans who included their gender identity on their records under the previous policy may be targeted. We've heard anecdotally some stories, but we don't necessarily know what that means for the larger community. And this is just a little bit of detail about some data sets. I got into some more details here, but you know, it's not necessarily something that's going to impact the general public, but when you think about like how survey data is really important to like how like the future of the work that we're doing, all of this information is being removed from different types of surveys. So there's the National Inmate Survey, which collects data on incarcerated people and shows like the intersectionality of different identities and whether or not they're more likely to experience mistreatment. The Census Bureau has started collecting population counts starting in 2013, and it's only in the last few years that they started to directly include sexual orientation and gender identity about economic and health related experiences. So what that means is that if the questions from these surveys can be removed, it means that this is not the only group that is going to be impacted. It means that in the future, it could be that other topics such as disability, race, ethnicity, economic variables, or others could also be removed, really limiting our understanding of like how people are impacted. Also, the DOJ can request data from the Census Bureau to really kind of have a deeper understanding about how LGBTQ people are impacted, and that helps with enforcing federal laws. And so if we don't have that data, we are really, our hands are tied as far as like trying to make sure that people are kept safe and that we are effectively implementing laws like the Violence Against Women Act and the Civil Rights Act. So I realized that that was a lot of very intense information, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to share some resources with you. So Modern Military has a lot of direct services. That includes our Resilient Heroes program that is professionally supervised and peer facilitated virtual support groups that are part of our suicide prevention program. We have, that is funded by the VA. So even if folks are not able to join that program, we encourage them to come to our Strong Communities meetings. That is also the same type, professionally supervised, peer facilitated virtual support groups. We have PFLAG Connects meetings. That is actually for the parents and caregivers of LGBTQ youth. And then we also have included the Trans Lifeline hotline and Veteran Crisis Line information here as well. There's a number of ways that you all can get involved with Modern Military. I wanted to highlight that we have a pro bono attorney network that we are building out right now to assist trans service members. So if that's something that you would like to be a part of, please go to our website and sign up for that. And then if you decide you want to go and find more details about like all of the information I shared, there's a lot more details here about, you know, the data and legal cases and everything that you all can dig into. And that is it for me.
All right. I am gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, so for those who don't know me, my name is Simone Chris. Can't do two things at once, so hold on one second. All right, can everybody see my screen? I can't see any of you, so I'm gonna assume yes. So great, thumbs up. My name's Simone Chris. I use she, her pronouns. I am the director of the Transgender Rights Initiative at Southern Legal Counsel. I have been on the front lines of the state's attack on trans rights for the past few years. I've been with SLC for going on 9, but we do a lot of federal impact litigation, challenging the laws and policies that the state has passed. Particularly, we've challenged the, Don't Say LGBTQ law, the pronoun ban for teachers, the SB 254 criminalization of gender affirming care for minors, and the first ever restrictions on transgender adults accessing healthcare. We challenged the Medicaid ban. We've got lots of cases on appeal at the 11th Circuit right now, and have been largely successful in challenging these state policies and laws. I want to remind folks that everything that Rachel just talked about, and if you're not living under a rock, everything that you're seeing happen to the trans community in this country is horrific and so devastating. And I think we need to hold space for what our clients are experiencing, not just whatever the issue is that we might be helping them with, but just existing in this current hostile climate has impacts that we can't even really, I think, put into words yet. But the thing I want to remind folks is that while this is very grim and not necessarily good news, Project 2025 that we're seeing implemented at the federal government level is just Florida 2023. Like, we have lived this, we have been here, we have been facing these exact same laws and policies and efforts to strip trans people of their right to exist in our state for the past few years. And so, if you want a roadmap to see what's going to happen next, look at what Florida did. We really are sort of ground zero for battle testing these horrific measures to erode the rights and freedoms of trans folks. But again, the good news of that is like we kind of have lived this, and we have seen how resilient the community is, and we've developed many strategies to challenge and push back against these things. I also do lots of individual advocacy and name and gender marker change clinics, and have, leading up to the inauguration, we helped 600 plus people between November and January to do name and gender marker changes prior to the change in administration. If you're interested in getting involved in doing name change work, I always need more pro bono and legal aid folks to assist with the clinics that we do. We, help between like 100 and 300 people at a time with this process. So it's a really cool, a cool thing to do if you're interested. Okay, so let's get started. I am going to go quickly through a lot of information, but you'll have this PowerPoint if you want to look at it closer later. And if you have any questions, you can always follow up with me. But basically, if you don't understand the importance of legal authenticity and having an accurate ID that actually reflects who you are, I cannot overstate how critical it is to meaningfully participating in society. So there's the practical things of like housing, employment, public benefits, getting a drink, getting, pulled over, boarding an airplane. There's so many places where many of us who are cisgender, meaning our gender identity aligns with our sex assigned at birth, do not even have to think twice when we show our driver's license to someone. But for trans folks, when the license or ID outs them, meaning discloses their gender identity without their consent, it can lead to discrimination, harassment, and even violence. We know that trans women of color particularly are disproportionately subject to violence and are often murdered for just existing. And so these are, having an ID that outs you to strangers and to others without your consent is really dangerous, in addition to being a barrier to economic stability and security and all of those things. But many people haven't updated their identification documents. I'm going to explain why in a moment, but we know that, studies have shown that access to legal authenticity is a structural intervention for economic security, et cetera. And for kids in particular, being treated in accordance with their gender identity at school often is contingent upon having an updated birth certificate. So in states like Florida, which I'm going to get into in a minute, that have banned gender marker changes on birth certificates, it can create a really impossible situation for kids who are just trying to exist and live authentically at school. Okay, so for those that don't know this process, to do a name change, you need to fill out a petition and some accompanying forms. It's a pro se process, so we don't have to represent folks in this process. And the reason that I'm able to help so many people, like literally, like I said, 600 between November and January, is because we help them fill out the forms and make sure that they have all the information they need and feel empowered to go file them on their own. But we aren't representing each person in the case. So they're doing this pro se. If a person has specific issues or complications and they need representation, of course we can, but it's not required. Many people don't know that the $400 filing fee can be waived. There's an application for indigent status. The courts don't tell folks that. I know you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but we make sure that the person, is able to fill that out and get the fee waived. Then the person has to get fingerprinted for a background check. This is a huge obstacle for many folks because they worry they might be denied if they have any criminal history. The reality is, as long as you don't have a felony conviction and you haven't had your civil rights revoked, you can get your name changed. But many people are worried about that. So being able to educate our clients on this process is super important. Then you request a hearing from the clerk of court. You appear before the judge in a court hearing, sometimes on Zoom, sometimes in person. All of these things by themselves are barriers. And that's why we need to be helping trans folks with this process. Finding the right forms can be really difficult. The $400 filing fee can feel like an impossible barrier. The fingerprinting, the appearing in open court and outing yourself, in front of strangers, all of these things are barriers. And once you get the name change, it doesn't automatically update every document. Then you have to go to, the FLHSMV, the tax collector, and update your license. You have to go to Social Security and update your Social Security record. You have to send in your name change to update your passport, your birth certificate. So there's things involved in this that are not just common sense and easy, and that require, advocates to be able to help walk folks through this. It used to be that if you had a physician's letter saying that you'd undergone appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition, you could get your gender marker changed on all of these documents. However, the state of Florida and now the federal government have banned gender marker changes on these documents. And I'm going to give you guys a quick overview of how that happened and where things stand right now. But the basics for a legal name change is you have to live in Florida. You have to file in the county where you currently reside, regardless of how long you've lived there, regardless of what it says on your license. It's where you currently live. You have to have not had a felony conviction that resulted in your civil rights being revoked. And if you're over 18, you file an adult petition on your own behalf. If you're under 18, a parent or legal guardian has to file on behalf of the minor child. I'm not going to go through this. This is in here just for you guys to see later. I train lots of pro bono attorneys and legal aid attorneys on how to help people fill out these forms. So these are just instructions on how to direct folks to fill out each of these forms that's required. So you can reference this later if needed. You could also attend one of my trainings for attorneys on how to help folks with this process. But these are in here just so you have them later. Okay. Let me click through these real quick. This is the filing fee waiver. That's a big one, again, for folks who cannot afford the $400 filing fee. I also created the first of its kind in the country website called FloridaNameChange.org. We are in the process of revamping it. It's going to be so much easier and more seamless to use for folks who maybe have used it before, but it's basically TurboTax for name change. So it asks you some forms or asks you some questions, and then it auto-populates the forms for you. And it takes things that we as lawyers take for granted, like knowing what your judicial circuit is based on the county you live in. And it makes it super easy so that you don't have to know that. You just click your county and it, auto-populates things like your judicial circuit. It emails the forms to you when you're done. They come to your email all filled out and ready to just be printed and notarized and filed. So if you have questions about using Florida Name Change, please contact me, but it's FloridaNameChange.org. Okay, so update on the status of these identification documents. But just a quick timeline is around the end of 2023, the Department of Health stopped amending gender markers on Florida birth certificates. Something that is super insidious and troubling that the state of Florida is doing that I don't think enough people are talking about is doing these things through back channel ways without legislation and without rulemaking. So, you all might remember that they used political appointees to ban Medicaid for all transgender people in Florida, minors and adults, ban Medicaid coverage of gender affirming care by using AHCA, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, to create this, predetermined outcome report investigation of gender affirming care, blah, 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 used the boards of medicine who were political appointees with known anti-trans, positions, to use rulemaking to ban care for minors. All of this prior to the legislature codifying these things in statute. Here, it's even worse. They aren't even using rulemaking. They aren't even pretending to follow any sort of, process. They're just subverting the legislative and democratic processes by doing these things in the dark, in the Sunshine State. So without notice to the community or anyone, the public, they stopped amending gender markers on Florida birth certificates. Then in January 26th of 2024, the FLHSMV stopped amending gender markers on driver's licenses and IDs. Again, not with legislation or rulemaking. Both, I will note, redefined sex in the similar way that the federal government is. It's completely unscientific, not evidence-based. It has no place in like the medical or scientific community, but they redefine sex in a way that literally excludes transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. But those definitions of sex do not appear anywhere in the Florida statutes or anywhere else. They've just made them up and are now relying on them as the basis for denying gender marker changes. Then January 20th of 2025, the Gender Ideology Executive Order came out, which Rachel mentioned earlier, that basically said we've redefined sex again in a way that excludes trans people. And Marco Rubio, as the Secretary of State, ordered the Department of State to stop issuing any passport with an X gender marker for non-binary folks, or processing any application to amend the gender marker from the person's sex assigned at birth to their to reflect their gender identity. Then based on that, the FLHSMV here issued a new memo closing a loophole that was allowing folks to still update their driver's licenses using their amended passport. I'll get to that in a minute. Then based on the Gender Ideology Executive Order, even though it didn't mention Social Security, an internal message went out to Social Security employees saying not to change a person's sex on their Social Security record. Then in March, some trans folks in Florida began receiving these letters from the FLHSMV reverting their gender markers back to their sex assigned at birth if they updated their gender marker on their license after January 26, 2024. I'm going to give you more details on these. I just want you to have the timeline of how we got here. And then there have been a few folks who have tried to amend something on their passport other than their gender marker, and they've had their gender marker reverted to their sex assigned at birth, which is why our guidance right now is, unless you absolutely have to, do not make any changes to any of your documents, particularly if you have the correct gender marker listed on any of your documents. Don't replace them, don't change your address, don't change anything at this point, because we need to see what's going to happen. There are lawsuits challenging these things, and the hope is that we'll restore some sense of normalcy and decency, and folks will again be able to have documents that reflect who they truly are. I'm not going to go through these because Rachel did a great job, but just a reminder that there are a bunch of anti-trans executive orders. But what's in the tracker that I recommend if you're trying to follow these, because it changes daily, is this justsecurity.org. You can click on which executive action you're interested in, like the gender affirming care ban, the trans military ban, whatever it is, and it'll bring up the status of the litigation challenging it. Just a quick note that none of the executive orders or any, so I just mentioned the federal government has banned gender marker changes on passports and Social Security, among other things, and the state of Florida has banned gender marker changes on driver's licenses and birth certificates, but nothing that has happened at the federal or state level has changed anything regarding name changes. So you can still change your name through a court order. You can then update the name on all of your documents. There's no issue with amending name, but like I said a moment ago, if you happen to have, let's say, a passport that says the correct gender marker that reflects your gender identity, if you do a name change and then you go to change your name on your passport, there is a chance that they're going to consider that a renewal because of the form you have to use to amend it, and they might revert the gender marker back. So if having a gender marker that reflects your gender identity is important to the person, which it is for all of my clients and I think most trans people, then it's really important that we talk folks through the potential risks of doing a name change or changing anything else on their documents at this point. All right, and you already know that stuff. Okay, so the FLHSMV, I put out a memo when that first policy change happened in January of last year. If you want to read it, it's linked here, the full thing, explaining why their fear-mongering language about like trying to make people think they're going to get, in trouble criminally and get charged with fraud and such is completely baseless. The statutes they cite are ridiculous. But anyway, that's there. They put out a memo, again, no rulemaking, no legislation, just a memo redefining sex. And then this technical advisory that says, here's what I find interesting. It says the customer's gender as displayed on the license must be taken from a primary identification document. What they didn't remember was that they define primary identification document to include a US passport. So prior to January 2025, I was advising my clients, update your passport and then use that as your primary identification document that they say in their own policy has to match. So many folks were using updated passports to update their driver's license even during that year when it was technically banned. So what we need to know, the basics, is this should only be applied to people amending their existing driver's license. So somebody who has their sex assigned at birth listed on their ID permit license, who is trying to change it to update it to reflect their gender marker or their gender identity, because they specifically say this only applies to replacement licenses, not renewals, not first-time licenses, just replacements. That's important. So folks who are renewing, I recommend doing it online. Don't give them any reason to question you or anything. There is a chance that they could revert it to your sex assigned at birth when you renew, but that is not what the policy says. And if that happens, please contact me, because that's not the language they used. If you're getting a first-time license or ID, let's say you're 15 getting your permit for the first time, or you just moved to Florida, if you bring in a birth certificate or passport that says the correct gender marker, it should not apply to you, because again, you're using a primary identification document and they have to issue you a license that matches that. And they don't have anything in their system saying what your sex assigned at birth is. So there's no way for them to know. Previously, like I said, folks, I was telling them to use their passports, but the Department of State stopped issuing gender markers on passports, and the FLHSMV is no longer allowing passports to be used to amend gender markers on licenses. So if you have a client who has an amended passport with the correct gender marker, make sure they use that instead of their license. to prevent being outed. So if they're like, anything other than driving related, like, if a cop pulls you over, don't show them your passport, you need to show them your license. Or if you're like renting a car, but otherwise your passport could be used as the identification document to prove age, identity, citizenship, etc. Just making a quick note that the reason that the loophole was closed, and this new memo came out that I'm going to show you in a second that basically said you can't use passports to update gender markers, is because a trans woman had a video that went viral on TikTok or Instagram saying like, hey, I got around this rule and here's a loophole that the state of Florida doesn't know about where you can change your gender marker. And that went viral, got the state's attention, and then they closed the loophole for everyone and started an audit to see who changed their gender marker in the past year when they weren't supposed to. And that's really devastating. I'm not blaming at all. I understand the desire to like celebrate this win that she had and to help others know that they could do this. But we're living in a time where we have to be really careful about what we put online and what we broadcast, because the state and federal government are looking for ways to shut down the rights of our clients and our community. Okay, so this was the new memo issued, but again, it says specifically replacement license. So I think that's important, not renewals, not first time, just replacement. And again, none of the statutes they reference have this definition of sex that they made up. Okay, so as of we've seen people getting this letter that changes their gender marker back to their sex assigned at birth. I will say I'm tracking this. I've got 50, 60 people that have sent me all the information about when they amended theirs and where and how, and it's only being done to people who changed their gender marker after January 26, 2024. So if you amended your gender marker prior to that, you should be fine. Your license is not invalid. They're not going to hopefully send you a replacement one. And even people who are receiving this letter and getting their license changed back to their sex assigned at birth, they're still able to drive. It's not the license isn't as invalid. It's that specific physical credential with the wrong gender marker is invalid, but you still have driving privileges. And between you all and I would tell that person to keep that one on hand, because it's an ID that shows the correct gender marker. And for purposes of like anything other than getting pulled over, or, something like that with law enforcement, they can use the one that is affirming. Okay, I went through this. Again, if you have clients that already have the right gender marker on their documents, do not make any changes until we have more information about how this is being implemented and what tax collectors' offices might be being more affirming, like we saw before. There are good people, like Mr. Rogers said, find the helpers. There are helpers everywhere that are trying to do the right thing and protect people. Okay, this is the letter people are getting. It's devastating. It basically just says, we made a mistake. Here's a new license with the wrong gender marker. It's devastating, but again, it's only folks that amended it in the last year. For birth certificates, you might have clients that are being denied birth certificate gender marker changes. This is what the denial letter looks like for adults. They're applying a different section of the Florida Administrative Code than has ever been applied before to gender marker changes on birth certificates. It's garbage. And what I'm going to let you know is, even though it says you need evidence that's from that was established prior to your 18th birthday, and it has to be at least 5 years old. And then for minors, they're saying the evidence has to be established prior to the child's 7th birthday. I have numerous clients that have submitted evidence exactly meeting that criteria. This is a blanket ban. They don't actually care what document you provide. We have a lawsuit challenging this that we're going to be filing shortly. I've helped many people exhaust their administrative remedies, so to speak, and file petitions for administrative hearing. None have been granted. None have been successful, because this is just a blanket categorical ban with no basis in reality. And so we are challenging it in federal court, and I'll keep you posted there. The basis of what you need to know is you can still change your name on your birth certificate, of course, so everyone should change their name, but you can't change your gender marker. It's a blanket ban. Again, we're challenging it. And if you have a passport that says the correct gender marker, use that instead of a birth certificate, because it's also a primary identification document, just like a birth certificate. Okay, federal documents, real quick. This executive order said you can't change passports, you can't have X gender markers. This should not apply to anyone who amended their gender marker prior to January 20th. They still have valid passports, even if they have an X gender marker, but new passport applications to amend the gender marker or get an X gender marker are not being processed. people, if they have a valid passport, do not send it in regardless of the name or gender marker listed, because we have people that have been waiting like a month, 2 months, 3 months to get their passport back. And I think we are living in a time when all trans people and all people really need to be able to leave if needed and need a valid passport. Hopefully this will be blocked in federal court and then we can move forward. Okay, the White House has made clear this is retroactive, not this is not retroactive, it's prospective, meaning they're not going to go back and invalidate old passports. But they have made clear that when it is renewed, when your passport is renewed, they may change it to reflect the person's sex assigned at birth. The question is like, what if when you got your passport, you used a birth certificate that was already updated? How would they know what your sex assigned at birth is if they have no record demonstrating that? So there's a lot of questions about how this will be implemented. We'll see. But there's been accounts online of people saying, oh, my passport was confiscated or destroyed, or people being detained while traveling. I've been meeting with the heads of, the national LGBTQ rights organizations, and thus far, none of those accounts have been verified as being accurate. There's no reason to believe people are having their passports confiscated or destroyed, or that they're being detained or anything like that. But again, if a person has a valid passport, hold it tight, don't let it out of your sight, don't send it into the Department of State until we have more information. Okay, some people who are changing other things, like something else on their passport, not their gender marker, have received this letter that says, like, we changed something on your passport application to show your biological sex. So this is why we don't want people making amendments to anything at this time. Social Security, there's no reason to think that anybody's Social Security record, if they amended it prior to January 20th, 2025, will be impacted in any way. And no reason to believe that they will revert it back to your sex assigned at birth if you change something else based on these emails, which you can read yourself. I've put out statements at various times about all of the executive orders and their impact and the litigation challenging them. So these QR codes will take you to those. Again, as I said, Florida 2023 is Project 2025. And then this is just the status of the laws we've challenged in the state of Florida to give you a little bit of hope. Here are some resources of some of the stuff I talked about earlier: Florida name change, the driver's license stuff, executive order guidance, other resources to get care out of state. And thank you so much. Turn it over to you, Christy.
Thank you. It's tough to follow superstars like Simone and Rachel, but I will do my best. So the good news is we've gotten through a lot of information. This is the easier part. So listening to everything Rachel and Simone said, it's pretty overwhelming, the pace of things that are changing. It's good to know what we can do right now for our transgender community members. So my part specifically is about helping transgender veterans change their names on their military documents. So it's very limited. I'm happy to hear we can still do court-ordered name changes, because that is really the only prerequisite for the veterans documents to be changed. So this is an overview of Florida Legal Services. I am happy to be launching a brand new Veterans Justice project that covers the whole state of Florida. So I am so fortunate to have my team with me from my last job, and they are helping us get the word out about this project. Please share it with everyone you know. You can email me to get flyers about our services, but transgender name changes is something we'll specifically be helping veterans with, as well as VA claims and appeals and discharge upgrades. So the transgender veterans I've helped in the past have all been Florida residents, just coincidentally, even at my national job, and they all transitioned after their military service. So like Rachel was saying, the problem now is if they leave the military voluntarily or are forced out by executive orders, they're not going to be able to get their gender affirming care at the VA, which is just really heartbreaking, that is becoming a less welcoming place, and a place where they can't essentially get health care. So I have a pop quiz for everybody. I think Jorge is going to run the poll, so vote really fast because we don't have much time. But what do you think? Is a veteran's gender listed on their military discharge document, which is called the DD-214?
All right, so the poll is live. The answers are coming in, and gonna give them a few more seconds. Yep, we have close to 60% participation. They're still coming in.
Suspense is killing me.
All right, so I'm gonna cut it off in 3, 2, 1, and pull and share results.
Okay, I
Do you
still
see the
can't.
results on your screen, Christy?
You're gonna have to tell me.
Okay, so we have with 52% yes, 15 out of 29 said yes, 10 out of 29 for 34% said no, and 4 out of 29 for 14% said I don't know.
Okay, pretty even split there. So the answer is, drum roll, no, oddly enough. So I'm going to zoom in here. For those of you who are not veterans yourselves or have not seen this before, this is the DD-214. So this essentially summarizes a veteran's entire military service on 1 or 2 pages. So it'll ask you, it'll have your name, date of birth, social security number, dates you served, places you served, type of discharge, which is always important for us. But there's not gender anywhere on there. So that makes this kind of easier. What we're usually looking at is character of service. So like if someone was kicked out of the military for being gay under don't ask, don't tell or prior policies, it might say they got an honorable discharge. We hope it does, but it will say homosexual act or gender dysphoria or something like that. So that's something we can help a veteran change if there's information like that on their form, which they then use to get a military discount at the store, get a military ID, like a military sticker on their driver's license, join the DAV or the VFW. So like I said, the veterans I've helped in the past had transitioned a long time ago, already had their court-ordered name change from Florida, had changed their social security card, birth certificate, everything. So they had everything ready. So I got to share the good news with them that for this last document, which is a big deal because that's the only thing showing your military service. And to not be able to show that to people without outing yourself as transgender is really harmful. So it's exciting for them when they're starting this process, but it is a little easier because they've done the hard part. They got all the other documents changed. This streamlined process that was published in 2022 sometimes is streamlined, sometimes is not. So funny story, my very first transgender name change was for an Air Force veteran, and it went so smoothly. It only took 6 months, which any of you who do veteran stuff know that is like lightning speed with veteran stuff. It only took 6 months, easy peasy, got the new DD-214 with the veteran's correct name. And then I tried a Navy veteran upgrade, and it got sent to every single agency at the Department of the Navy. So I do not know how things are going right now with these name changes for veterans. So this is not for people serving in the military currently, just for veterans. I don't know. Are they prioritizing this? Are they putting these applications in the shredder? Unfortunately, I don't know. So if you know of any veterans who need name changes, please have them reach out to me. I do want to help them as quickly as possible, but they don't have to submit any evidence of medical treatment or anything. It is, if they have that court-ordered name change, that is supposed to be good enough for the military to update their DD-214. So for the Army, I'm not going to go through each one, but I wrote it out on each slide for each branch of service. I have not tried an Army one yet. I will say Army discharge upgrades and records corrections usually take 2 to 3 years. I hope this would be a simpler process, but you never know. The Navy, I updated after getting sent around to every agency for a year with the last one. So this is what I think you should do, but take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes it will get sent around the block and you just have to keep following up and keep at it. The way that this got out of the never-ending circle of agencies for my case for my client was a nice person called from the Department of the Navy and was like, I don't know what is happening with your case, but it's being sent everywhere in error. Let me fix it. So if you ever see a call coming in for any of the military departments, don't miss that call. They can be priceless in getting things to where they're supposed to go. So again, you are just supposed to have to include the DD 149, which I'll show in a few slides, that's the application for changing your military record and a court-ordered name change. You do not have to submit life history or medical records or anything else. And you'll see on some of these, they suggest doing it by mail or email or fax. They are still using fax in the military, so don't let that throw you off. That might be the fastest way to get that to them. Air Force, like I said, was really quick. It only took 6 months. The Air Force is also the only military board that has an online portal where the veteran can submit their case online. Now, I will say it is nice for a veteran not to go through this alone, like Simone said, for the name changes, because it is alarming sometimes. And, the Air Force did a good job on the case. It came out fine. But when they acknowledged that they had received my veteran's petition, they referred to her as Mr. So they referred to her as her dead name that was on her DD 214, even though the application was specifically for a transgender name change with her correct name. So she panicked and called me and was like, does this mean they're not going to grant the name change? And I assured her that would not be the case. They're just a little clueless sometimes. So it is always nice to have someone help you through this process. This is the DD 149. I'm going to zoom in on this. It's a pretty simple form, and Jorge will send you all the link. I just Google it every time before I use it to make sure I have the updated version. It's mostly just information about your military service, the name you had while you were serving, your current name, social, mailing address, and then the veterans I've helped so far have both had honorable discharges. It was just that their dead name was on their DD 214, so that's what we were helping them change. So you don't have to fill out, reasons for a name change specifically, but what I put in box 18, which I'm not sure how to get to again, but there we go. On box 18, there's some sample language that Swords to Plowshares created, so I want to give them a shout out. I'm messing up this form, but I promise there's a box 18. It just might disappear, where there's more information. So they created sample language, which I think is on my next slide. Yes, so this is from Swords to Plowshares. We want to double, triple check to make sure that the boards do not refer to the fact that the name was changed on the new and improved DD 214. So we don't want it to say, oh, now this veteran's name on this document is Christy Bagalow. It was formerly Chris Bagalow. We don't want any reference to the fact that a name was changed on the DD 214 because that defeats the whole purpose. That sounds obvious. I promise you it's not. Something I have noticed with discharge upgrades overall is they're all starting to note on the new DD 214 reissued via the Army board or the Navy board. I don't like that. So I'm going to start asking for them not to note that on the new form, because I feel like that could cause questions. If someone knows what they're looking at with the DD 214, they're going to say, well, why was it changed? Did you get a bad discharge? Did you change your name? We don't want any questions asked these days. So that is something I'm going to be noting on all discharge upgrades, but especially for the transgender name changes, definitely add this language in. And that's all I have. So perfect timing. See if anyone has questions. But thank you all for attending and learning how you can help our trans community members during this stressful time.
I started dropping some links into the chat, like a lot of them. One of them is a link with the materials folder. We're still missing some of the materials, but I'll make sure to upload those before that email goes out. I did drop the CLE code here before we go into any questions. We have the CLE code, so I'm going to read it out loud just in case. It's 2502429. I dropped it into the chat. I'll also include it into the email. If you have any questions, feel free to either drop them into the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any yet. We're at one, so I want to thank all of our speakers for this amazing presentation. There's so many takeaways. One of the areas, I think Simone was presenting a slide on all these barriers that people face, and that was really eye-opening. I've advised people in the past about petitioning for name change, but I didn't really think about all those other barriers. And Whether you are in the audience, you're an attorney, a pro bono attorney, a volunteer, a law student, always feel free to connect with us. These are great volunteer opportunities. They're great learning opportunities, and it's a great way to give back to our veterans, our people, and people in our community. So I do see that there's one question that came up, and here's the question. Can the presenters share more about the culture that VA and military members are experiencing aside from the policy and legal barriers?
Rachel, I'll defer to you if you have updated information.
I don't know that I have anything. I mean, I have anecdotal evidence of what people are facing, and there is, a lot of questions and fear at the moment about what this all means. I think because we're in this period where there's, lawsuits that are happening and things are changing quickly. Some people are having positive experiences, if they have good command structures, or if they're going to an affirming like VA, but it really just varies based off of like the situation and the location. So unfortunately, I don't have anything more to share than that.
I mean, I would just note it's, I think a lot of folks see the headlines about what the executive orders say and do, or like what they are, but don't actually read them. And I would implore all of you to just take the time to read them, because for folks in the military, like the language is so unbelievably offensive and basically says that expressing a false gender identity is inconsistent with the rigorous standards necessary for military service, and like makes clear that people are literally not qualified to serve our country and do the things that they're doing because of their gender identity. And it's just that one uses some of the most horrifying language. And so I think just existing in a world where the federal government is demonizing you as a human being and using the same rhetoric that we've seen weaponized against, to segregate Black men, protecting white women and children from Black men, and protecting people from gay men during the Lavender Scare and the Johns Committee, and now using this language to imply that trans people are inherently dangerous to others and people need to be protected from them. I just can't imagine the toll that rhetoric is taking on every single human in this country who is not cisgender.
That's a great point. And by the way, we have an all volunteer military. So it's wild to me, the language being used. The VA has already been in the news in past years for not being super welcoming or a safe place for women and LGBTQ veterans. So I imagine a lot of people are just self-selecting and saying, I'm not going to go because it might be uncomfortable. It might not be the VA doing anything wrong. It might be the people in the waiting room treating you wrong or making you feel unsafe. So it's really unfortunate. Just the attacks, like Simone said, that have been going on for years here, but are now ramping up across the country, and just the uncertainty. That okay, you're able to serve proudly as of 2016, and then suddenly you're not. Oh, maybe you are. On again, off again. I can't imagine that kind of uncertainty. Like I said, in an all volunteer military force where we are having recruitment issues. This does not seem like a smart decision to me. I think we should honor everyone who volunteers to serve, but we'll just have to hope for the best at this point. But I really appreciate what you guys are doing every day and being out there at the forefront and letting people know that there's hope and there's good information out there, because otherwise they would just see all the bad.
I was going to add as well that if people are worried or are looking for additional resources, to come to our website and fill out information either for our Resilient Heroes program, our discrimination reporting form, and we will try to get them to where they need to be, or give them the case management services they need. If they're not comfortable going to a VA facility, we'll try and identify community-based resources that hopefully are reduced cost or free as well.
Speaking of, one of the documents that I've added into the materials, it's like a Google Doc. I'm going to turn it into a Word document as well so everybody can easily access. But I've included contact information for all of our amazing speakers. I also have links to all of these websites that have been addressed. I highly recommend you subscribe to both of the newsletters that I had mentioned. I see these emails come in every day, and it's a great way to keep up to date with all these changes. Follow them on social media as well because they have a lot of great events, educational events, that are definitely really great for everybody to attend. So I don't see any other questions. Any closing statements from any of our speakers? I do see a few thank you messages in the chat. This presentation was amazing. So any closing statements?
I just want to know I think mostly attorneys are on here, and to give it's one thing to give hope to like the community being impacted, but to give hope to my fellow legal professionals, I recommend, if you haven't seen it, looking at the ABA statements, rejecting efforts to undermine the courts and the legal profession, and then the one that said the ABA supports the rule of law. It is so soul-filling to me to see other legal professionals and like so many bar associations coming out and speaking against these things. And then the fact that Supreme Court Justice Roberts like publicly rebuked something that Trump said, and the 2024 year-end statement that he put out. I just think there's things in there that can give us hope that maybe the judiciary and the legal community might be able to hold this administration accountable for like both the blatant attacks on human rights, but also just the disdain and disrespect for the system of checks and balances. So I recommend looking at those things if you need to feel hopeful.
All right. So I know we're a little bit over time. I think this is a great way to wrap up our webinar. Thank you all for joining us here today, and thank you to our three amazing speakers. Rachel, you came off mute. Anything else to
Oh,
say?
I was just going to say that joy is resistant. So finding joy where you can is really important. And whether or not that is, in the fight or going and taking care of yourself, like we have to take care of ourselves and find, hope and joy where we can. So just want to end it on a positive note.
I agree. Thank you all for joining us here today. Have a great rest of your day.